Welcome back to the SampanViking on China channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the damp squib that was the Summit for Democracy, and not necessarily concentrating on the summit itself, but what the underlying purpose of the summit most likely was all about. And I'll start off by saying first of all, this was a very strange thing to do in the first place. Other people have said this. Other people have also noted the very eclectic guest list of who was included and who was excluded. And what you have really isn't so much a summit of democracy, it is a block meeting of the Friends of the United States, who they like to say for the purposes of simplicity, I think, more than anything else. They are the democracies, and anybody who wasn't invited, presumably, therefore was not. So there we are. The new US definition of democracy is whether or not we like you. If we don't like you, you're not a democracy, no matter what your political system is, what you may describe yourself as, you are not a democracy. Now, this has another underpinning, and I'm very grateful for the Duran on this because they pointed out a very important and very useful fact. And that is that they believe that the purpose of this summit was in fact to launch a rival structure for international relations, rival to the United Nations, which as an institution has lost its appeal to the United States because it can't control it anymore, like it did at the unipolar moment, or briefly. They've been slipping out of their hands for some time. Now it's pretty much gone completely. They're up against a rival bloc that vetoes everything they try to get rubber stamped through the Security Council. And so they need another route of legitimacy. And if the United Nations is the forum which upholds the principle of international law, the United States was looking for an institution that would uphold their principle of the international rights-based order, or international what's it? Oh, whatever it is they call it. The rules-based order. Sorry about that. Yes, the international rules-based order, which is their own construct, which basically means whatever they say, whenever they say it, and they can also change their minds and cancel it and go back to something else. Whatever it is that serves their purpose on the day. That is the international rules-based order. And they needed an institution through which to operate it that gave it legitimacy, that gave them legitimacy. And the Summit for Democracy clearly, I think, was earmarked for that role. To say that, well, we have moral righteousness and moral superiority over all other nations and all other forms of government. We don't need them. We shouldn't be held back by them. We are going to coalesce around ourselves and tell ourselves what a wonderful bunch we are and how right we are and how entitled we are to go out into the world and do unto it whatever we so wish. Well, with that in mind, this is obviously a fairly major undertaking. It's a drastic departure from the norms of the last 70 years, and you would have thought that anything looking to do that, either it would alarm people so that they would say, look, in the media, so look what they're doing, this isn't right, they shouldn't be able to do it, or they would be wholehearted acolytes of the project and be trumpeting it from every tower and every precipice and every corner. But nothing could have been further from the truth. This was an example of an event that barely got a mention. Some of the speeches got mentioned, but there was very little context into why. I suppose it could be because they realizing well, there were two basic reasons why it could be. A, that nobody outside of the initial political clique itself was actually interested, which would be very fascinating if true, because that would mean that there is a major split in the establishment, and that would actually be a divide between media and the political class, who we have come to believe to be indivisible. And I'm not ready to throw away that supposition of indivisibility yet, although something like this does give you rather pause for thought. The other is that realizing that if this was being discussed too much, it's a very, very hard sell, and so best to soft pedal it so that the plebs don't realize what's being done in their name. Let it consolidate, let it get a bit more established, and then start to trumpet it as when it is a fait accompli, and they can say that this has been running along for some time, protecting our interests, protecting our democracy. Of course, a phrase that was heard repeatedly during the summit, the protection of democracy. And so something that then can be sprung when it has sort of been subtly prepared in the minds and people accept it as something that exists rather than what it is, something that is completely new. That's rather insidious. And whilst I would hope that there is a split between political class and media class in the West, I rather suspect and fear it is the latter, because that does rather make more sense, with the fact that there is very little indivisibility between the two sectors. It is highly unlikely that there would be such a split in this way, unless it's a different kind of split again. But that opens a whole new can of worms to do with the security of the Biden presidency and whether or not there are sinister forces, neocon forces at work looking to supplant him. In which case, are the neocons in favour? Are they against? We will have to wait and see on that. Um, but certainly, I can see it as being a project. It doesn't really matter which side is in control. They want the institution set up because an institution is a vehicle that can be steered by whoever is sitting in the driving seat. So, it makes sense to set it up and to use Biden. If Trump had set it up, you can imagine that there would be a tremendous howl coming from the liberal quarters because it's cuddly Joe Biden, not a whimper. I suspect that's more. The more I think about it, as we speak, I think about it, and the more I do, the more it seems likely that actually is the direction of travel. But I counter that by saying, well, it's not the only high profile, high trumpeted meeting, discussion panel, which has rather been a damp squib in the last 7 days. The other is the finding of the Independent Uyghur Commission tribunal set up by the British government, but done independently, although it seems to be a lot of British MPs and other people sitting on it. The very definition of a kangaroo court, I've described it as the independent tribunal for finding China guilty, and lo and behold, of course, they have. This think tank funded, government funded, or independent so-called tribunal listened to a lot of testimony from US funded and UK funded dissident groups, and who all spoke on script, and lo and behold, they all agreed China was guilty. But here was the strangest thing with that. The media wasn't the slightest bit interested, and they actually had I listened to it in person on the BBC's Radio 4 Today program. They had the lady who was the vice chair or something, who was also a senior backbencher Tory MP, a leading light in the 1922 committee, which is an organisation for Conservative backbench MPs in Westminster. And despite one or two questions, I mean, from the BBC Today's programme hosts tend to be incredibly anti-China. This should have been a marriage made in heaven for the China haters, because this should have been their dreams come true. But again, I was actually quite surprised by how disinterested the presenter was in the tribunal. He had this woman come on, he asked her a few general questions, he pointed out, well, it's a difficult sell to call it genocide when nobody's actually being killed. She waffled on a bit about saying, oh, well, it's cultural genocide, it's people saying about birth prevention, one or two things, all of which, by the way, is highly conjectural, and highly speculative and very controversial in its claims and highly unreliable from its sources. But leaving that aside, even the BBC presenter wasn't that interested. He then started to grill on the far more pressing topics, obviously, about Boris Johnson having parties in 10 Downing Street last Christmas when everybody else here was told to stay 10 miles away from the nearest human being, and also the equally important thing about the cost of the funding, rather, of the Prime Minister's private flat in Downing Street, which again is Boris Johnson. And when it came to the broadcast BBC News, although there was a little item on it deep in the Asia section of the BBC website, when it came to the broadcast part of the BBC News, it didn't make it. It was dropped in favour of the far more pressing subject of underage teenage girls being able to access lip filler services, when of course such services should have been refused to them. Well, yes, that concerned against genocide. Obviously, the lips story was going to take over. What's going on? So maybe there is a split between establishment and media. Maybe it is a neocon and neoliberal split. Well, if those definitions actually mean anything really in today's modern politics, or more to do with not giving Biden or why the Uyghurs would come into that, I don't know, but not giving Biden too much credence or credit for anything, so it's easier to shunt him off and get the proper people in, as no doubt the neocons factions, Victoria Newlands, etc., would regard it. Well, we will see on that. But it has been a very strange week and difficult to actually concentrate on a particular subject. It's been this little hodgepodge of winks and nods and trying to sort out, is there an underlying story to it? I think the first part is absolutely true. This is an attempt to set up a rival institution to promote the international rules-based order. I believe, despite the seemingly damp squib nature of the reaction, that has actually gone through. Likewise, with the Uyghur Tribunal, if you consider that the Uyghur story was part of a destabilization program, all to do with the occupation and the natification of Central Asia, repeating what NATO did in Eastern Europe in Central Asia, and then destabilize Russia and China from that position. This is a project that failed. It failed, effectively in August when the US had to leg it rapidly out of Afghanistan, and with that, any use for the Uyghur story went away. The lasting legacy, Uyghur human rights, China bad, has been established in the Western psyche amongst the ordinary people. So, that's probably is a good a result as they're going to get. There's no point concentrating on it anymore, because if they do, now the problem they were facing before, too many people can go in there with a camera. The more they talk about it, the more they try to expose it, the more likely they're going to expose actually it's a crock of what's it, and nobody's going to believe it for very much longer. So, leaving that aside, it may just be a coincidence that the two landed at the same time, and they are not related causality by means of causality as to in terms of the reaction of the media to it. Slightly different things. So I'll round that up by saying that the farcical Summit for Democracy, as of itself, was a damn squib. It was more of a comedy than anything else. I've seen other presenters barely able to keep a straight face while they talk about it. I understand why. And certainly the Ursula van Leyden comments on there are so distant from self-awareness and the irony. She should be doing stand-up. But there we are. It probably is a more sinister and underlying structure to it, which means that the concept of the institution promoting the US's international rules-based order has been established, and that can now bubble along in the background and start to promote, in the name of protecting democracy, what are probably going to be some pretty anti-democratic ideas. That is something to keep an eye on, and I am overrun rather longer than I intended, so I will wind up this video at this point. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. If you did, please like. If you are not a subscriber to the channel, please hit subscribe. It's free and it helps the channel to grow. If you would like other people to hear what I have to say, please hit the share button. And if you have a view, would like to ask a question, or even want to give a comment on what you think about this channel, please leave a comment and I will reply to the best of my ability where it is appropriate to do so. Thank you very much, and I hope you join me for the next video.